case.
Right.
Yeah.
So you'll be live online. She has a link to.
I'm going to tweet it out and say, watch Gary live.
Cool.
University of Akron.
Right.
Awesome.
You might have more listeners out there than in here. I just messed with you.
What part of I know, I said I'm right here in this desk.
Yeah. The only thing was I wish I would have stayed one more day.
That's pretty high out.
John, we use your Valley, everybody coming.
Sure.
Did you go to the class?
No.
Yeah, no, by the time I fed him, and then by him too late.
All right. All right, everybody. You're outside the Excel Center, and you are going to be involved in our next session. Please start working your way into the Excel Center space. We're going to get going here in T-minus 1 minute with Gary Schoeniger and Bree Langemo from ELI. Did I get that right? Yep. All right. From the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. So we're going to be taking on the word entrepreneurship and education and getting real serious about how we add to the culture around here. All right. Well, everybody, we've had a very successful day so far. And yesterday was also a phenomenal day for our launch. We had city leaders here, we had community leaders, business leaders, among all of our students and faculty, and we've really begun to see a nice cross-section forming in this room. And unlike what I kind of listed as workshops, panels, speakers, the word I didn't know until yesterday, it kind of occurred to me, is that the word I should have heard was bullpen sessions. Because what seems to happen in this room, maybe it's because of the whole mural and the creativity that saves the angles, it seems that when a question or an idea gets thrown out there, different people with different experiences seem to chime in, add to it, tell from their experience, the people they know, the group they work with. And then it adds to it, and a student will throw something in, and a faculty, and it just goes until that idea kind of gets exhausted and another one rises. It seems more like a bullpen and a sharing of ideas. And for that, I'm really grateful, because that's one of the things that kind of came out of here that I don't think any of us really saw coming. And so today, we're very excited that the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, or ELI, has come to the University of Akron to share with us some of their internationally recognized practices, tools, techniques. And without further ado, I just want to say thank you to Bree and Gary and everybody. This is Gary Schoeniger.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
So this is great. I'm glad we have
So,
a small, intimate group. We can make this more interactive and more of a conversation. Super excited to be here, share some of what we've learned about entrepreneurship over the last decade. I want to start out by telling you who I am. I founded this company in 2007 after an experience teaching a young high school dropout how to be entrepreneurial. So, and the impact this little experience had on this kid and changed his life. He was from a high school dropout to a scholar. And so I've looked at entrepreneurship to try to deconstruct how they do what they do, why they do what they do. I'm trying to understand it from an empowerment perspective. So if you'll bear with me, I'm not really looking at this as a business discipline, and I'll make a semi-cogent argument why entrepreneurship really has very little to do with business. So bear with me. And I wrote a book in 2010. It's called Who Owns the Ice House? That's where the name Ice House Entrepreneurship comes from. And I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But I want to start with a question. How does a guy, this is a guy in Mississippi Delta in the 1950s. That's the real guy, I'm completely normal. How does a man who has no particular advantage in life, not intellectual, not social, not political, not academic. In fact, he's in an environment and circumstance where there's a lot working against him. How does this one guy manage to thrive when everybody else has accepted Mr. Walter's field truck as the norm? This is really what I'm trying to understand. What it comes down to is the way he thinks. Right? What Uncle Cleve represents is he's a positive deviant. And so let's take a closer look, let's take a more analytical look at what's going on below the surface. Now, I woke up this morning, in my Google alerts, I have a lot of terms about entrepreneurship, and there it is again, a Huffington Post ad. Do you have what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur? This drives me absolutely batty. And what the world is doing is we're making this enormous fundamental attribution error. We're looking at entrepreneurs as if they're unique individuals with some scientifically unfathomable ability, and we're completely ignoring the context, the social, environmental, and situational factors, which prove to be a much more accurate explanation for behavior. So what I want to share with you is the research that we did. I started on this path in 1991. I first set out to understand how. What are the processes that entrepreneurs undertake? Like, what are the actions they undertake? And that quickly led to the why. What's going on psychologically? What are the underlying attitudes, beliefs, the deeply held assumptions that are driving behavior, motivational factors? And that led us to something even more interesting, which is why not? Right? Why not be entrepreneurial? And what I also hope to do today is make a cogent argument for the idea that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. In the same way that Dr. Land in the 70s, with this now famous study about creativity, have you heard of the study? Right? I'll tell you about it in a minute, but basically the conclusion of Dr. Land's study is that non-creative behavior is learned. I'll make the same argument that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. That we're all hardwired to be entrepreneurial. Not everybody wants to start a business, but most people want to be engaged in entrepreneurial activities, which is identifying and solving problems, right? Seeing their strengths, seeing their interests and abilities applied to something greater than themselves. We don't show up on this earth. It's like a paycheck to go to Myrtle Beach once a year. Right? There's more to life than that. So, let me dive in. This is something I find utterly fascinating. I can't figure out why the entire world is not freaking out about this statistic. It's research from Gallup. 68% of workers in the United States are not engaged in their work. That's 2/3 of people in the United States. And for the US and Canada, it plummets. The global stat is 87%. So the vast majority of human beings on this planet are not engaged in their work. Like, what's going on? This is the way they break it down, right? Actively disengaged. What does that mean? I'm paraphrasing Gallup's description, but these are people that are spreading negativity among the workplace, right? Not engaged, you guys know what that looks like, right? It's Monday. Oh, it's hump day. Oh, thank God it's Friday, right? Looking at my watch, can't wait till 5 o'clock, right? 32% are engaged. what I'm going to, my theory is that the people that are the most engaged are people that are being entrepreneurial. Italicize the I-A-L. They don't start businesses, they're entrepreneurial. They're engaged in self-directed problem-solving activities, right? So let's think about this differently. There are 10 of us in a canoe, and we're paddling upstream. 2 of us are paddling backwards. 5 are kind of flapping their paddles in the water, kind of doing this. And 3 are pulling the whole boat. That's the sense of what's happening. What's going on? What's happening? Student engagement is not much better. We're in higher learning institution. Many of you are very aware of this, right? Gallup refers to this as the engagement cliff. From elementary school to middle school to high school, boom, down. It's called a cliff. There are some changes underfoot, right? The head of HR at Google is saying that GPAs are worthless as a criteria for hiring at Google. Worthless. Jesus, right? We were thinking about school and learning and work and life is changing very rapidly. So I want to draw attention to the 32% that are engaged. These are people that are entrepreneurial. And we understand the value of entrepreneurship in terms of economic growth. We know that all net new jobs are coming from entrepreneurs. They're coming from firms that are 5 years old or less. You know, that's all fine and good. I'm also interested in entrepreneurs are advancing our understanding of the world. They're solving social problems. They're making a contribution to our society. So, I'm intrigued by this white paper published by the World Economic Forum, where they're acknowledging, like, policymakers around the world are waking up to the idea that entrepreneurship, we need to promote entrepreneurial thinking at all levels of society. And I lifted this quote from a paper published by the World Economic Forum by Klaus Schwab. And he's saying it's not enough to add entrepreneurship on the perimeter. It needs to be at the core of the way education operates. What does that look like? So it sounds like a big, lofty goal. The question is, how do we do that, right? What does that really mean? For all we hear about the term entrepreneurship, this concept's not really well understood. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask a question about that. So you've defined entrepreneurship as problem solving. How does the World Economic Forum define it in that?
Similarly, but they're getting closer to a definition, and I'm going to get more into definition. It's a really good question. And defining it is really a core issue. It's really a core issue because, and that's exactly where I'm going. So I'll give you this $20 later. Right. So how do we do that? We really don't understand entrepreneurship. Why don't we understand entrepreneurship? For the last 100 years, in a thriving industrial economy with lifetime employment, job security, pension benefit, entrepreneurship is essentially irrelevant as a field of study or something. Right? So today, entrepreneurs are the engines that are driving our economy, creating jobs, advancing our understanding. We really don't understand it very well, and we tend to look at it in one of three ways. So we started looking at the process, then we looked at the person, and as I said earlier, then we looked at the situation, and this is really where the enormity of our understanding is starting to unfold. Honestly, we haven't, like I'm fond of saying, it's like we found something in the backyard, and it's so enormous we haven't found the edges of it yet. And for those of you who are so inclined, I start by saying that I'm interested in entrepreneurship from a perspective of empowerment, because I want you to know where I'm coming from a different perspective, in the hopes that some of you can help advance our understanding and our thinking in this domain. I don't really care about your widget and how much money you made. I mean, that's cool. But what I care about is human flourishing That's what I'm really trying to understand. So, person, process, person, and situation. I'm going to start by talking about the process. Anyone here read Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow? He's a behavioral psychologist, won a Nobel in economics for this work. One of his, he cataloged all these cognitive biases. Thinking Fast and Slow, but I can't recommend it enough. It's a little bit academic, but worth the effort. He calls this there's a visibility versus representation issue. What you see is all there is. So who makes headlines, right? The Silicon Valley, the Uber, the rich kids at Stanford in hoodies that drive around a Porsche with like multi-billion-dollar valuations for their idea they cooked up in their dorms, right? So when we hear the word entrepreneur, it often conjures up the image of the Silicon Valley high-growth entrepreneur, right? And the problem here is, and there are several problems I would like to address, and I don't have time to address them all, but let me just generally say that it pollutes the way we think about entrepreneurship. In many ways, it's as if we decided we need to teach all students about financial literacy, and we start showing lottery winners as the examples of financial literacy, right? What we now understand about self-efficacy, like if there aren't relatable social models, these examples can do as much to discourage the pursuit of entrepreneurial behavior as they will to encourage, right? So, I've taught thousands of educators from 5 continents in the last 5 years about entrepreneurship. My understanding is broadening daily, so I'm not saying I have this all figured out. What I'm saying is I've been in universities as far away as Azerbaijan, all over Latin America and Europe. And what I see is entrepreneurship programs that look something like this. I'm generalizing, but they look like this. Tone firmly implanted in cheek. I call them plan and pitch approach to entrepreneurship, right? Some version of this. There's a technology-centric bias right out of the gate. It's for the coders, for the hackers, right? So it's exclusive, and that it tends to favor, I believe it does so because it's over-influenced by the Silicon Valley money interest of venture capital. The technology startups are more likely to have a rapid growth and turn a big profit, right? Very important to understand the incentive of a venture capital investor and the incentive of the entrepreneur are very often at odds. Okay? So we see this type of curriculum, I'm generalizing. Tech-centric bias, to come up with an idea where it's obvious that it's a high growth potential idea. Right out of the gate, it's clear. It's like a lottery ticket. You scratch it off the surface, I won, see? I see this in universities. Kids walking around, I need to come up with an app. And if it's not right away, they throw out the idea and they're running around looking, their ideas are skewed about what it means to be an entrepreneur. Right business plans, right? We have a young woman who recently Kent grad works in our office. She said the capstone program in the state, 30-page business plan. If you want to destroy the American entrepreneurial spirit, have people write 30 pages. That's how you do it. So, conduct in-depth market research. Make 5-year financial projections. Look into your crystal ball. Prepare a slide deck if you're going to show your investors. And I see this all over the place. Like, because the whole purpose is to get funding. Like, that's the gold star. An enormous proportion of these high-growth, venture-backed companies fail, right? And getting funding is a false metric. You still don't have a customer. You convince somebody to give you money. You still haven't proven your idea yet, right? So, some form of this, I'm sure this is not happening at Akron University, right? Present company accepted, right? But here's just a little fun fact I'd like to point out. There are about between 400,000 and 500,000 new businesses created in the U.S. each year. And it swings. It's on the lower end now. I think it's back up. roughly speaking, $500,000. That's how many of them are started with venture capital investment. A fraction of a percent. So that's just a little fun fact that sort of helps you realize these venture-backed, high-growth startups can really skew the way we think about entrepreneurship. I'd also like to point out very briefly the difference between a high-growth firm and a high-impact firm. So a 30-year-old kid sells his iPhone app to Yahoo. A 17-year-old kid sells his iPhone app to Yahoo for $30 million. A few people make a lot of money, but they're not creating jobs. They buy 5 pairs of pants every year, just like I do. Right? Maybe they drive 2 cars instead of 1. By contrast, a high-impact firm is something that's creating jobs, adding value to the broader community. The SBA published data on this. High-impact firms typically reach their growth phase somewhere between years 17 and 25, depending on the firm size. It's another little bucket of water on the quick high growth approach to entrepreneurship. So this is one very common view of entrepreneurship that's keeping us stuck on the perimeter. This high growth, get the hackers together, come up with an app, get VC funding, and make yourself rich. That's one, we need high impact firms, we need high growth stuff, it's all fine and good. It's just like saying if you can't make professional NFL, don't ever touch a football. Right? It's a game only a very, very, very few people can play with. It's also important to note that the venture capital industry is underperforming the S&P 500. So really smart people with millions of dollars of their own money on the line are getting this wrong and ignoring it. So for others, the word entrepreneur conjures the image of the Main Street business owner, right? And so what happens here, we see this in small business development centers, community colleges. Oh, you want to open a business on Main Street, do you? Okay, great. We're going to teach you small business management skills. Some of you may have suffered through this, right? We're going to teach you. We're going to treat your startup as if it's simply a smaller version of a large corporation. So come into our small business development center. We're going to have some managers from large corporations in the 90s help you do formal market research, write a business plan, learn a little bit about finance, learn a little bit about accounting, marketing, sales, legal structures, and then encourage you to pursue bank financing. And there are a number of problems here. First of all, banks aren't in the business of loaning money to startups. You shouldn't be giving money to ideas that are not proven. It perpetuates the idea that money is the barrier to success. People think, oh, I need money. I have these hopes, I have these dreams, I have these ideas, but I need $100,000, I need $50,000, and it's not true. It's just absolutely a false narrative. You don't need money to be entrepreneurial. So, the point I want to make here is really quite simple. These are important skills for managing a business. Got it, right? These skills are toxic to the entrepreneurial process. They don't help it. Entrepreneurship and management are two different things. And in our research, beginning at the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute in 2008 in San Jose, then with the Kauffman Foundation, what we've been able to do is sort of pull apart entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills from managerial. And that's where the big aha really happened for us. So there's a third category. Some people hear the word entrepreneur and they think, evil bastard, right? I was trying to find a picture of that pharma guy, Shkreli, right? The guy that everybody loves to hate right now. He'd be a better picture up there. But that's what people think is an entrepreneur. And so my point is this: look, if you think of you're thinking of Mark Zuckerberg, you're thinking of the Main Street business owner, or you're thinking of Gordon Gekko, Bree's good. There are good reasons for each of these. right? In the same way that the Uber, Snapchat, Facebook founders are always in social media, the guys that are going to prison are also making headlines. And we're really not aware of what the everyday, ordinary entrepreneur is really doing, right? We're really paying attention to these studies. And I started this company in 2007 because we saw the disconnect. We understand the importance of entrepreneurship as a way to empower ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The way it's being characterized in classrooms, small business development centers is really disconnected from the reality of what entrepreneurs are actually doing. And we started to look at what entrepreneurs are actually doing. There's a very, very compelling subtext there. It's a very compelling story of human endeavor that's happening everywhere. In our towns, big, small neighborhoods, our neighbors, realize what they're doing. They're just behaving in an entrepreneurial way, and that's what we sought to understand, sort of deconstruct. And I'll share that with you now. So, I'm just going to cite this one piece of research we found. A guy at Harvard named Amir Bidet looked at several hundred Inc. 500 startups to understand the origins and evolutions of the businesses. And we found a carefully planned venture-backed startup by far the exception. And so here you might recognize these logos. These were some of the companies included in his study. Walmart, Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, Waste Management, some big brands. Here's what a typical Inc. 500 startup looks like. This is going to get increasingly frequent, right? There's no breakthrough technology. There's nothing novel. There's no intellectual property. There's no big idea. The entrepreneurs themselves aren't doing much formal planning. They do, it's like somebody told me to, I stuck it in the drawer. And they're not writing formal business plans. Nor are they doing formal in-depth market research in the way that the taught in business school. Today refers to it as ad hoc. It's sort of face-to-face interaction and observation, gut feeling. This is really something, right? The median startup capital for an Inc. 500 company is about $10,000. It's not coming from institutional investors. It's a patchwork cobbled together from credit cards, second mortgages, friends, fools, and family. Right? It's just a few $1,000. I mean, Sam Walton's a perfect example, right? 1946, he opened a discount variety store in Bentonville, Arkansas. Now, Bentonville, Arkansas just happened to be the perfect environment for a discount variety store. I don't know if the population in Bentonville was back then, but I don't know much. 1946, a few $1,000 cobbled together from friends, fools, and family. It was 23 years later he had 7 stores and started a distribution in 1969. So 23 years left. So this is the freakiest of all. The founders themselves have little or no experience in their chosen field. In Bidet's study, 40% of the Inc. 500 founders had no experience whatsoever in their chosen field. So I want you to just pause for a second and look at that and think, how is this possible? Right? This looks like it's defying gravity. Right? This looks like it's completely like inverse reality. Blue pill or the red pill. Right? And so this is the point at which we make this fundamental attribution error. Which is we look at the successful entrepreneur and say, this person has some scientifically unfathomable abilities. There was actually an economist at Chicago School of Economics, Frank Knight, famous economist in the 1940s, actually said that. The entrepreneur's decision-making process is scientifically unfathomable. I'd like to unravel that without the next 10 minutes. Unravel this one. So, about how that happens. Part of the research we did with Cisco and then continued with Kauffman afterwards is I've now interviewed hundreds and hundreds of these entrepreneurs, what I'd call the unlikely entrepreneurs. I've interviewed entrepreneurs through partnership with the State Department, Slumdog from Kenya with a flip phone clamshell, Jordanian woman working in Saudi Arabia where women aren't allowed to leave the house or drive a car. Doing incredible things, starting engineering agencies with dozens and dozens of other women, starting a women-owned, women-run engineering firm in Saudi Arabia. I could sit here for the rest of the day and tell you some of the stories. What's common among them, I'll share with you. So I'm going to try to explain this and I'll be brief about it. I mentioned Dr. George Land at the beginning of my remarks. Have any of you seen the TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson, How Schools Build Creativity? Have you seen that? This is where I found the research. Land did a study. NASA asked Land to, NASA came to Dr. Land and said, we need you to help us figure out who are the most creative of our scientists at NASA. So you create a survey so we can figure out who the most creative are so we can solve our biggest problems. And Land created the survey, and he said it worked quite well. About 2% of the scientists in this survey at NASA scored genius level. And he said this was working quite well, and he was quite proud of himself. And then he had the idea, what would happen if we gave this same test to a group of 5-year-olds? We gave the same test, 5-year-olds. How many of these 5-year-olds scored genius level? It was the exact opposite, 98%. Right? So then he got the idea, why don't we make this longitudinal and see what happens? And sure enough, at 10 years old, it went from 98% to 30%. 15 years old, it went from 30% to 12%. More than 250,000 adults have been tested around the world. It's 2%. Non-creative behaviors learning. Right, that's kind of. So Dr. Land created this concept called transformation theory that I found the most useful way to sort of separate entrepreneurial from managerial attitude, behaviors, and skills. So what he's saying is that there are 3 phases of life. Any organism, any living thing, whether it's a company, a culture, an organism, an animal, a human, there are 3 distinct phases. And what he's saying is these 3 phases each require separate rules for survival. There's a search phase, there's a growth phase, and there's an obsolescence phase. And while each of these 3 phases is unavoidable, the trick, according to Land, is to understand which phase you are in so you understand which rules to apply. Make sense? Okay. So, break points, this is Ken Robinson's comment about the break point and beyond, is where it comes from. The break points are basically the moment in time where the rules for survival change. It doesn't mean necessarily a moment in time, but so the search phase, we're searching for this first little red dot. This is where the organism is searching for a connection with its environment. Now, how do we do that as humans? How do we connect with our environment?
Through our senses.
Pardon?
Through our senses. Through our senses.
Through our senses, yes. That helps us navigate the environment. One way that we connect with our environment is by figuring out how to create something useful for our fellow humans. figuring out where our talent, where our interest is, and how we can apply that to something that solves the problem of other people. So let's just say we're searching for the intersection between what we care about, what we know how to do, like to do, and what other people need. It's a real subtle shift in thinking that we're never really told. The way we're taught to think and the way we're taught to learn, our expectations about work are predicated. You're in Akron University, and there's an underpinning to the assumption, often unspoken, that you're going to work for an established organization. Someone else has already figured out what's useful, and you're going to adhere to the job description within that organization. You don't really need to figure out what's useful. You just need to do this part of the overall task, right? So here's what we always get wrong. The search process is optimized by lots of uncertainty. That's what the yellow bars kind of represent. Ambiguity and uncertainty. Well, guess what? As humans, we hate ambiguity. If you're here to get an engineering degree, it's like becoming a Marine. When you get off the bus, you walk in those yellow footprints, and you hit all the wickets, you got an engineering degree. Congratulations, right? There's no real ambiguity. As humans, we're very, very resistant to walking down a path and not knowing what the outcome is. This is what Kahneman's Nobel was about. We'll make judgments, we'll make decisions against our own self-interest to avoid this uncomfortable ambiguity. And defining ambiguity is a little bit different from uncertainty. In uncertainty, you know what the variables are. In ambiguity, you don't know what the variables are. This is something Donald Rumsfeld, unknown, that's what we're talking about, right? So the search process is optimized with lots of uncertainty and limited resources. That's not an accident. That's an optimized situation. When you have resources, it dulls your ability to search. Right? Somebody gives you money, let's buy some fancy computers and build a fancy office and go home at 5 o'clock. Right? The resource constraint is actually your friend, because it forces you to focus on figuring out how to make something useful that people need. How do we know what we've created is useful? What is the evidence that we found that dot? So we found the intersection. It's currency. Some form of currency. It doesn't have to be money, but generally speaking, it's buy-in. People are asking for it. They're telling their friends about it. They're paying for it. That's scientific evidence that what you've created is useful. Make sense? Okay. So lots of ambiguity and uncertainty, very limited resources, happens to be the optimal search environment. Giving money makes you stupid in the search phase. So if you want to understand why entrepreneurs so often they come from challenged backgrounds, I'll get into that a little more later on. So what are the attitudes, behaviors, and skills required to search for the intersection? Observation, empathy, inquiry, curiosity, experimentation, adaptation, creativity, right? It's really about stop thinking for a minute about what I need, or stop doing the task somebody told me to do, then look up and start to observe what's going on here, what's not working, what's frustrating, start to question things. Why are we doing it this way? Maybe there's a better way to do it, right? That's where the naivete comes in. Right? The Buddhists say, in the mind of the expert, the possibilities are few. In the mind of the novice, they are plenty. Right? Many. Something to this effect. problem-solving skills, right? You develop problem-solving skills. Critical thinking, there's no better mechanism to teach critical thinking than to pursue a problem-solution fit in an ambiguous resource-constrained environment. It's the epitome of critical thinking. People rarely behave as we predict. They rarely behave as they say they'll behave. You can't be an entrepreneur without becoming a half-assed student of human behavior, behavioral economics. Your plan can look like it makes perfect sense on paper. People will say, I won't pay more than $3 for that. And their wife says they want to pay $300 for it. Like focus groups are essentially worthless, right? Collaboration, communication, teamwork, commitment. Where's the locus of control when one is searching? Where's the locus of control? It's internal. The organism will perish if it's not able to find a connection with its environment at a certain time. So there's an expectation like I have to figure this out. Another way of saying it is like this. There are no rules. There are rules, but they're just not documented anywhere. The rules are more about behavioral economics than they are known rules. So the rules are unknown. No one is in charge. And more importantly, no one is coming to the rescue. That's the environment that we search for. To optimize the search process. And so in resilience, you see this sign right here. You know what resilience, anybody know what resilience means? What's the definition of resilience? After failure, after setbacks, to deal with self-doubt, to self-regulate, right? To optimistically interpret adversity is the Seligman psychology. So let's imagine, see this is going down here, right? Why? Because the organism is consuming more resources than it's generating. But this is also a psychological factor. You start out enthusiastic and optimistic and your idea sucks in the beginning. And no one's buying it and it's not working at all according to plan. And your plan B, plan C, plan D, and you start to you're becoming discouraged. With a resilience, right? But you're learning, you're adapting because of the resource constraints. And this is a really important part of the puzzle that enables entrepreneurs to discover things that are otherwise undiscoverable. I was experimenting in a high school classroom with these ideas, and I had about 25 kids. And I said, what are your ideas? I'm paraphrasing, but, by week 2 or week 3 of the class, I had them out of the building talking to strangers out in the world. I asked them what problems they care about, what were their ideas for businesses or whatever, and go talk to people whose problems you endeavor to solve. And one young kid who was a C student named Steve Orlando, this is the 2006-2007 school year, Lake Catholic High School, Mentor, Ohio. And he said, I want to start an office cleaning company. I'll make a little side business out of doing that. Okay, fine. Go talk to people who have their office cleaning. Now, here's another really important, powerful aspect of entrepreneurship education. This kid's knocking on doors, and I told him, you got to talk to 50 people. Sample size matters. 3 people turning you down doesn't mean anything, right? You have to talk to a lot of people. Like 50, there's a significance in 50. It's like kind of a minimum threshold. And he's knocking on all these doors, and he's not getting any traction. There's no one saying, hell yes, I want you to clean my office. And what people aren't really telling him is that the idea of an 18-year-old kid in my office after hours is like just too scary. They're not even saying that. They're just not calling him back. So part of what this entrepreneurial discovery process teaches or encourages that is really, really vital is for young people to be able to separate signal from noise. Too much of the way we're learning now, there is a right and a wrong answer, and that's it. As Dr. Scarborough said in his comments, You have to make decisions with ambiguous, limited information. You have to go and keep it that way. You never really know what's going on, right? So no one is asking this kid to clean their office. And he gets to about door number 37, and the guy said, I don't need my office cleaned, but I manage all these strip malls in Northeast Ohio. And we have a truck service that comes in to sweep the parking lot, but we need someone to come around and empty the trash cans and pull the gum wrappers out of the garden beds. Can you do that? This 18-year-old high school student got a $100,000 contract to clean parking lots while he was a senior in high school. His father called me on the phone and to explain to me, like, I can't believe the change I've seen in my son's attitude, not only about his new endeavor, but about his schoolwork. And then he paused for a second and he said, is there any way I could take this class? A kid just figured out a $45 an hour job for himself. So let's imagine you find this first break point, and that means people are buying. You found it. You created something useful. I want to enunciate this. You can lift people out of poverty with these ideas. You can, if you're working at Subway for minimum wage, you already know how to make a sandwich. Can you figure out how to make a better sandwich than that piece of junk you're making me for $8 an hour? Yes, you can. Right? Senge taught us this. If we're not aware of the broader system, we tend to see ourselves as powerless. So you created something useful. I interviewed a guy in Cali, Colombia. His name is Koki, which is an unfortunate name for somebody from Colombia. He was very poor, liked to cook, and he started making brownies, but he fiddled with the brownie recipe until he got a really awesome brownie. And then he wrapped them up in cellophane and went out on a bus stop outside his house and started selling the brownies to secretaries on their way to work. And they came back the next day and were buying 10 brownies and 20 brownies. And then the secretaries, some of them quit their jobs, were buying 100 brownies. You know what a franchise was. He had no idea what he was doing. He had to buy another oven and another oven. And this is how it evolved. And pretty soon, the largest food manufacturer in the world, Sodexo, showed up on his door and started buying brownies. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of brownies. Koki became known in Cali, Colombia, a city about 3 million people. I think it was the second largest city in Colombia, as long brownie. Right? He figured out how to create something useful. Is there anyone here, are there any students here, is there anyone here that is incapable of figuring out how to create something useful? Right? Just not taught to think this way. Right? We're taught, like, here's some knowledge, we're going to give you this knowledge. So once we reach this break point, the rules for survival change. And the system must now stop searching and start replicating what it found. And this is where it ends. So the system found this connection. People started buying brownies. Now the focus becomes, how do we make these brownies faster, better, cheaper? You know, packaging, creating channels, and how do you get, those are all management things. Does that make sense? Okay. So, of course, I'm generalizing, but what's happening here is the system, in order for the system to grow, it requires people who will adhere to policies and procedures. It's formulaic, and it requires a workforce that will comply with policies and procedures in order for the system to grow. That just is what it is, right? However, so often, these policies and procedures are designed for conformity, compliance. And very often, they're designed to eliminate any possible contribution on behalf of the worker. Anyone read Adam Smith? Yeah, he's the father of economic theory, look at 1773. Don't try this at home. It's like written in old English, like, oh my God, right? But he says, like, every man lives by trade. But at the time of shifting from an agrarian culture, the idea was that a man who is good with metalsmithing tools can make perhaps 10 or 20 pins in a day. But that 10 men, each doing a separate task, can make upwards of 4,000 pins. One cuts the wire, one straightens it, one sharpens it, one makes the head, one fastens the head, one polishes, whatever. Right? At the time, in the context, this was looked upon as an economic miracle. Right? Smith goes on to say that a man should be reduced to one simple task for his entire life, so that his dexterity in that task becomes maximized. Right? Many of this sounding familiar, right? We see this influence in the way we're still thinking about work and school and life. But Smith also says, people often refer to Adam Smith as like a friend of conservative. He's no friend of conservative at all. He also says, when a man is left to do this one simple task his entire life, he loses the ability to solve problems because the problems never occur. And then he goes on to say, and under these circumstances, a man becomes as stupid as a human can become. And I think this helps provide some context around my earlier statement that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned, and the influence of the industrial revolution over the 19th or 20th century is still infiltrating the way we think about education and work. So let me go on here. I'm going a bit long. What's happening here is we're starting to know why people are buying our brownies. Right? We know the demographics, so the uncertainty is starting to go away. And we're getting access to resources that people are buying. Right? We've proven the concept of buying the brownies. So the ambiguity is going down. What was ambiguity, uncertainty, naivete here starts to move towards confidence, perhaps expertise. Right? So, lo and behold, the second breakpoint occurs, which is brought about by changes in the environment that are generally beyond our control. Competitors, environmental, regulatory, whatever. The environment changes. And what happens is our growth starts to slow. What we're doing is not working as well as it did. Okay? The question is, how do we react to that? Right? Humans are so hardwired, we tend to cling to what was once a success strategy and ignore the changes in the environment, right? How many of us, our system is not working, it's not as productive, so we're asked to do more and more for less and less. Anyone live through that? Right? Just pedal a little harder, do a little more. Is that ever really the ultimate solution? No, it's not. It's a natural reaction to changing environment, right? One of the things, so what Land is saying is that in a perfect world, you're a self-aware organization and you realize the environment has changed and we need to start anew. So your life or the life of your organization should be a continuous series of S-curves, right? But that's not always what happens, right? In many cases, so the system has grown, now has access to lots of resources, right? And all the uncertainty is gone. So somehow this naivete, uncertainty, ambiguity morphed into confidence, morphed into certainty, morphed into arrogance and denial. Kodak. We know all of this and know about film. What's this digital nonsense? Right? If the system continues with the arrogance and denial, it will perish. So let's imagine we're a large organization. We say, uh-oh, this is not working, right? There's a competitive threat, there's an environmental threat, a regulatory threat, whatever. We've got to reinvent ourselves. The difference, muy importante, the system has grown. It has access to these resources, but it can no longer go off experimenting in the weeds. It needs to make big, bold bets. It needs to eat 1,000 pounds of red meat every day, right? So in a large organization, it's basically about innovation. It's often large-scale initiatives. It needs to make big, bold bets. Okay? And again, I'm generalizing, but this is, you know, there's lots of established channels in place. There's money, there's marketers, there's managers, there's researchers. There's all of these systems in place. And we now know there are, you know, 2 million secretaries in Cali, Colombia between this age and this age, so we know how big the market is, and we can know everything before we act. Right? So I want to just point out, this is what they teach in MBA, business school, right? They teach you how to innovate inside a large corporation. And what happens is this thinking gets transferred over here. And it doesn't work because of the contextual differences. So my point here is really straightforward. This is the water most of us have been swimming in for most of our lives. We came up into this when we were too young to challenge it. And I think that's a lot of what the millennial challenge is. Right? It's like we're swimming in water so long we don't even know what water is anymore. We just take it for granted. And these industrial era assumptions are so baked into our thinking process and our psyche, we're not even aware of them. That's the context, generally, attitude, behaviors, and skills that will allow large organizations to innovate. It's just very different from entrepreneurial. So this is really about the process, the entrepreneurial process. Resource constraint, ambiguity, searching for the intersection between problem, solution, and fit. What I also want, so the culmination of this idea is that entrepreneurship is a searching process. That's it. So let's just use this simple definition of what does that do for us. Now anybody can apply it. You don't have to quit your job. You don't have to go find venture capital. You don't have to invent something that's never been done before. It's just a search process. It's this organic. It's this a biological, natural ability to do. Right? As I demonstrated, search skills are skills that anyone can learn to develop. They're just skills that have historically been undervalued, overlooked, or ignored in our systems of education. We value them, so we've never had a chance to develop them. People talk about business failures. Why is that? Well, let me ask you this. If the World Series, you never held a baseball bat in your life, and somebody gave you a baseball bat and said, go out there and stand over that little square thing over there, and someone's going to throw a ball at you and try to hit it, but it's the World Series. A professional pitcher is going to throw it at you at 90 miles an hour. What's the chance you're going to get to first base? Almost zero. Almost zero. A few lucky ones make it to first base. Humans learn through repetition and feedback. You never get a chance to solve problems in resource-constrained avenues, problems that we care about deeply, not the problem our professor told us to solve. Oh boy, what's going on here? All right, there we go. Go back. I want to talk briefly about the person, then about the situation. Okay? So, on the surface, the entrepreneur appears to be an exceptional individual. Right? Somebody born with some hereditary ability. You know, like the article I found this morning in Huffington Post, some traits. his trade goes. We started to look beneath the surface at the underlying beliefs and assumptions, motivating factors, self-determination theory, and other factors. We found a much better explanation for the behavior. So bear with me. People talk about the word entrepreneurial mindset all the time. Most people have no clue what that means. I'm defining it here very briefly as the underlying beliefs and assumptions that drive behavior. Underlying being the key word. And I'm going to go one step deeper into this. Anyone familiar with the work of Edward Schein from MIT? Studies culture. On the surface, there are visible artifacts. Beneath the surface are espoused values. That's what I'm telling you, I know. But there's a layer deeper that is deeply held, largely unconscious, taken for granted belief and assumptions that are the true source of our values and actions. So let me put this to you differently. The vast majority of your decision-making process, and the numbers vary among social scientists, 70 to 80% of your decision-making process is happening below your conscious level of awareness. For example, they've done studies in grocery stores with French wine next to German wine. Similar label, same price. They play German music and the German wine outsells the French wine 2-to-1, and they switch the music to the switches. And when people come to the cash register, say, why did they pick the German wine? And the consumer will say, well, because it matches well with what I'm making. Most of what's influencing our thoughts, feelings, and actions is happening below our level of conscious awareness. Psychologist R.D. Lang said, the range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. So, I believe, like I've interviewed all these entrepreneurs, and what they're saying on the surface often is not that useful. You interview an entrepreneur, and he doesn't really know what he knows because he acquired this knowledge through experience over a long period of time. I'd be happy to share these slides with you guys after. Send me and make them available to them also. Should have said it in the sorry. But I believe this is sort of the genesis of entrepreneurial thinking from which all other thought and action occurs. And it's this deeply held awareness that it's my responsibility to figure out how to create something useful. And so the walls of the box come down, there are no limits. Right? And this sets one on a path of searching for how can I create something useful for my fellow human. And over a long period of time, through searching and resource-constrained ambiguity, you'll develop an entrepreneurial mindset. Does that make sense? It's not something you're born with. It's an effect more so than a cause. So here's what happens. What is your name? Pardon? Quackle? So we interview you. You just borrowed $500 from your mother-in-law 20 years ago, and you just sold your business for $20 million. And people say, Quackle, you must be a genius. My God, how did you do that? And they stick a microphone in front of your face, and they walk away from the interview, and they think, well, look, he's charming as hell. Look at him. He's charismatic, or he's creative, he's passionate, he's dedicated, he's confident. Look how confident he is. Quackle had none of that when he walked in the tunnel, or very little of it. He didn't know what the hell he was doing. He had all kinds of self-doubt and setbacks and problems. And because no one came to the rescue and you figured out how to solve the problems yourself, you develop a sense of self-efficacy. Right? But we interview the entrepreneurs and they don't know what they know, so they many times don't give meaningful answers. Like, well, how the heck did you do that? I don't know. I guess I got the entrepreneurial spirit. I don't know where it came from. Who knows, right? Or you say something silly like, I just work really hard. So we think, okay, he's got a work ethic, like it's a genetic thing, right? Passed on from your parents. When people can pursue problem solving and ambiguous, certainly, you know what's interesting? You know what increases persistence? The lack of authority. The lack of an authority figure increases persistence. You know what external rewards do? They undermine intrinsic motivation. So think about that. Grades, gold stars, dollars, whatever you want to think about. When people are telling you what to do and when to do it and punishing and rewarding you to do it, it undermines the intrinsic value of that task. Why do 1/3 of humans, once they leave school, never read another book in their entire life? Right? Entrepreneurs are the most self-directed, lifelong learners I've ever met in my life. Right? So I want to talk finally about the situation. The culture of schooling is radically at odds with a culture that creates innovations, right? What's going on right here at Akron University is the same thing. I was visiting a university in Bogota, and they took me to a center just like this, but it was in a house off in the corner of the campus. And the people that ran the house said, oh, the people want to show up here at 7 o'clock in the morning, we got to shoo them out of here at 10 o'clock at night. Right? Well, how do we flip that? Where the students can't wait to get into school at 7 o'clock in the morning, we got to shove them out the door, and there's 25 kids off in a building that just aren't getting it. Right? So, my point is quite simple. In the past, we've been creating entrepreneurs by accident rather than by design. Those 4 high-growth entrepreneurs I showed you at the beginning are all dropouts. They're all dropouts. How often do you hear somebody at the podium attributing their entrepreneurial success to what they learned in school? More often you tend to hear the opposite. I wasn't getting what I needed in school and I left to pursue this. So what if we started creating entrepreneurs by design? I already told you the story of how I met Uncle Cleve and Cliff Tolbert, the story of Uncle Cleve. That's the premise for the ICEHOUSE Entrepreneurship Program. It's being used in colleges and universities around the world. It's been presented at the Vatican to the Papal Council of Justice and Peace to eradicate poverty in Africa. It's been presented to the United Nations, the General Assembly in New York. In 2 weeks from next week, Bree and I will be in South by Southwest EDU, presenting our work there. I'm leaving South by and traveling to Belgium, to Brussels, to present our work to the European Commission. What we've created is a program to expose all students to these fundamental concepts of entrepreneurial thought process. And what we're finding is that, if you think about rings in a tree, further and further and further and further and further away from people who are self-identifying as entrepreneurs. Right? We're stuck on the perimeter because we're creating programs like this that only address the needs of those who self-identify. Of the hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs I've interviewed, so many of the interviews started with this. Well, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I found myself in these circumstances, and now I have 500 employees.
We got some people that are going to leave if we can't get started.
So I'm going to bring this to a close. What we've done is created a program that inspires and engages. We have relatable social models built into the course so students can learn and have the concepts reinforced with relatable social models. There's video interviews. We focus on the mindset. It's an experiential process. The great irony is, you look at what entrepreneurs are doing, they're following the most effective models of learning known to man. It's experiential problem-based learning, and Bree will get into that in a second. Bridging the classroom and the community, the students are encouraged to go out and find local entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial people, to bring them into the learning process so they see the behavior model in their own community. And we're asking people to be entrepreneurial. We're asking them to deviate from their own social, cultural norms. Right? We always overlook this. We're asking somebody to walk the wrong direction. It's not wired to do that. Take that into account. If I don't have relatable social models, the likelihood that I'll continue on this path is almost zero. And lastly, we created a course that the person teaching it doesn't need to know anything about entrepreneurship. So that's my story. We're going to now do a breaking the mold workshop. I hope you can stick around. Bree's going to kick it off, talking about the entrepreneurial learning process, how entrepreneurs discover opportunities. We're going to do some group projects, so some of you can figure out how to solve problems in the classroom here at University of Akron. And that's my story. I'm sticking with it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I think we're going to go right into the workshop if we can. We have some people that have factored into their schedule, so as much as we can do that right now, that'd be great. So thank you, that was fabulous. So anyway, and actually, I'm going to go get this. People, raise your hand if you need a bottle of water. All right? All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I just wanted to see if you guys could look around. Apparently there's some pair of keys that are missing, so we've got some housekeeping to do before we continue on. Any keys around? All right. Sorry, Carolyn, we tried.
All right, well, we'll keep on to. Hi.
So I'm Bree Langemo. I'm the vice president of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. I work with that crazy guy. And I came from Pike City Community College in Colorado Springs, Colorado, as the Dean of Business, Public Service, and Social Sciences there. And I would love to just, since we're kind of a small group, I'd love to know who you are, because it would help me frame some of my comments today. So would you like to start?
I'm Stephanie Pierce. I'm a creative inspired ministry. We're creativity tools and processes. So we create creative content and curriculum for learners, but